This isn't a shop. I guess it's time to make some bread. Okay, good old AP flour, all purpose, nice and cheap and simple and like the most basic flour that you can get, because what we're gonna make is focaccia, one of the simplest, cheapest breads that you can make that's a yeast bread anyway. The first thing we're gonna do is gently yeet the bread maker out of the way, because we won't need it. Focaccia is that simple. All right, today in my giant chalice, I have chai tea with some almond milk. Now, I think the most important thing to note about this recipe is that it's going to be a slow rise. Yes, I'm using quick rise yeast, but the longer you let it sit in the fridge, the better the flavor. Second thing that's pretty important, your water. Most recipes ask for lukewarm water. This one does as well, but also it's good to keep in mind the vessels that your water is going to be in. This has a lot of thermal mass, so does this. So from the time that I get that water into here and I get the yeast activated in the water, that's going to have lost a lot of heat. So I just made sure that the water was pretty hot. And by now it's less than 100 degrees. So that'll be perfect. I'll flash the recipe for this bread up on the screen. The oven goes to 450. I've been using 400 for most things these days and it works just fine. But that oven that I'm using is from the 1980s. So who knows how accurate it is. Anyway, water. Yeast needs to activate and eat and, you know, make all the fart bubbles that we love for our bread. So we put sugar in with yeast. The recipe that I found didn't have sugar in it. And I don't know how well yeast works without sugar. I don't want to screw around with it. So I put sugar in there. So we're gonna let that sit for a little bit. It also calls for a big four finger pinch of salt. I've been making bread literally my entire life. I grew up with my hands in bread dough. So I have a good feel for this. I know a lot of people don't, and I know that bread dough is pretty intimidating for a lot of people. And I really hope to at least have people comfortable making this type of bread, because you don't even stick your hands in it. This bread dough, I don't even know if I'd call it a dough, because it's more like a batter with a structure. 3 cups. 4 cups. I think this recipe was wrong actually now that I think about it, because I made it recently and because it's so easy, I just wanted to share it with everybody who's intimidated by making bread. I'm going to adjust it so it's correct. So that's 4, we'll do 4.5. Something about it was wrong, I don't remember. And because I've been making dough and bread my entire life, I have a pretty good feel of how this is supposed to look. Now, if I wanted a dough, at this point, I can see it's really gloppy. If I wanted a dough that I could turn out onto the counter and knead old-fashioned way, this is way too sticky. But for what we're doing right now, this looks good. If you can make bread with a kid in your life absolutely do it, because the smell is something that you'll never forget, and it'll always bring back the best memories. Cookies, whatever. You make bread. Bread's far superior, more sophisticated, all the good things. All right, that's super sticky. That's it. That's all you have to do. Now what you do is put this covered in the fridge. You can do it overnight. You can do it 2 days. Last time I made this, I did it for 2 days just because I work 12-hour days, and I don't always feel like pulling this out after 12 hours, letting it proof again, and then waiting for it to bake in the oven. So this is a really easy, flexible bread. It's very forgiving. Anyone can make it. Oh, also, this is a bread that you use a lot of olive oil with. I don't particularly care for extra virgin olive oil. I know every cook swears by it. I've been using it a little bit more than I normally do lately. I never cared for the flavor, and I never cared for the low smoke point. So like when you're cooking with extra virgin olive oil, if you're a fast order cook like I was at a few jobs, you have that burner cranked on really, really high. And extra virgin olive oil will burn quickly. And it's not good for you, and it doesn't taste good. So my choice for saute cooking is either grapeseed oil or sesame oil. Grapeseed oil has a really, really, really mellow flavor. I just moistened this with my hands so I can seal it. Grapeseed oil has a really mellow flavor, almost undetectable. It doesn't mess with a whole lot of food's flavor. And sesame oil, of course. Tastes like sesame seeds. Super nutty, really Asian taste. It's one of my favorites. I'll put it in stuff that isn't Asian. Anyway, this bread's gonna go in the oven for a day or two, and then we'll pick back up from there. All right, here we go with the focaccia. I got this huge pan. I really think it's too big for this little bit, but it'll just make a thinner, shallower. Oh, I found my grapeseed oil. It'll just make a thin focaccia. Actually, I have a piece I can show you from the last batch I made. This is pretty much proper size for focaccia, maybe a little thicker. This turned out really good. You put it in the toaster, and all the oil on the outside just starts sizzling, and it gets all crispy, and it's delicious. So I'm gonna fill up my squirt bottle really quick. I'm not a snob about my extra virgin olive oil. I just get what is cheapest because I don't trust grocery stores. I don't trust labels a whole lot. I really wish I could, but I just can't. There's a really cool podcast I've been listening to called Gastropod, and they have an episode about food labeling, and basically it's hit or miss with being able to trust it. Actually, I'm gonna use this one. This was another gift. This was from Ed's mom or sister. I don't know. Everything happened all at once. Anyway, it makes me happy because it's cute. So, like I was saying about food labeling, here's a long story short kind of thing to make my point. There's only so many hundreds of thousands of gallons that Manuka honeybees can make of the Manuka honey. We'll just say it's like 5 million gallons a year. And just some quick market research will tell you that, maybe don't use one of the whole. Quick market research will tell you that there were 15 million gallons consumed of Manuka honey last year. So I don't know what that tells you. That tells me they're diluting it, or they're just, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing over there. I don't work there. I just know that sounds misleading. Anyway, so remember last video, I don't know if it's going to be one video or a couple videos or chapters or whatever, but a lot of things happen in a lot of stages in a kitchen, and mine is no different. So I basically just punched it down, is what you call it. Usually use your hands, but since this is no knead focaccia, we are not going to knead it. There's still some structure there. This is not batter. Bread dough has a structure. AP flour will still give you structure. I think the difference is that AP flour, it's not as much protein, and therefore not as much gluten. The big bad gluten. It's not as much of that as there is in bread flour, because the gluten is a protein. I heard that there's a lot of people that don't know what gluten actually is. Anyway, be really generous with the olive oil here. Yeah, this will be a thin focaccia, that's fine. Anyway, it's still got a structure. You can't like gush it around like pancake batter or whatever. It's still a thing. So if I folded it over, you'd be able to tell in the final product. So I'm just gonna moosh it out. And the last one I made, the corners were a little too sloped for my taste, so I'm gonna really try to get it to go into the corners. Pretend like I'm not kneading it. This pan just happens to be really big for what I want to do here. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna cover it and it's gonna rise. Maybe I'll just leave it right here. Yeah, that's it. Get all this oil off my hands. So it's gonna rise, and then I'm gonna knock some holes in it with my fingers, salt it up, and then we'll bake it. Oh, the camera's getting all steamy. Yep, that's gonna be really tasty. So now, moving on to the focaccia. I think that's ready to go in. I'm gonna put the camera back on the tripod and show you the last little bit of how this goes. Okay, the oven's at 400 for the focaccia. So all you really do here is, I'm gonna put a little bit more oil. And I'll salt it first. And just poke some holes so it doesn't get super massive. And that's it, in the oven. Smells like the focaccia's done. I didn't use the timer because, well, I just don't. When the bread's done, you can smell it and it looks done. And if you really need to be diligent about checking, you can use the toothpick. But because this one is so thin, it's done. I promise. I forgot to tell you, use cooling racks if you can, because you don't want your bread to get steamy and soggy in the pan. So, ready, 1, 2, 3. Hoo-yah! Perfect. That's gonna be tasty.